we were battling Blockbuster. We battled Walmart. They got into the space and they exited. And we were battling Blockbuster right up until the end. And they were actually gaining traction with their total access. That was something that was eating at Netflix's business. But the problem was it was bleeding money. So they couldn't afford to continue doing it. And I think like once they had declared bankruptcy, that's kind of when it was just like, oh yeah, we won that battle. So for me, that's that felt like. Okay, now we're rolling out to now. Let's dominate the world. Let's go out there and run the tables.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. This is the podcast where you can hear the real stories behind the people on social media. I'm your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TrueFan. And before we get into today's conversation with Barry Enderwick, there's a couple things that we need to go over first. If you enjoyed today's podcast, be sure to leave us a positive rating and review, share this episode with a friend, and subscribe to the show. I put out brand new interviews every single Monday, and a brand new takeaways episode is an audio exclusive where I sit down and break down the most recent podcast episode of the week every single Thursday. And now, without further ado, I am very excited to present to you my conversation with Barry Enderwick. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to My Social Life. I am your host, Jacob Kelly. As always, today's podcast is powered by TrueFan. Today on the podcast, we are joined by Kaizen Creative Partnership co-founder Barry Enderwick. Prior to founding his own firm, Barry was a creative director of global marketing at Netflix, joining the team in 2001 when they had 75 employees and only 300,000 subscribers in the United States. During his 11 years with Netflix, Barry was part of the team that grew Netflix to an international streaming entertainment brand with over 23 million global subscribers in 47 countries. Barry, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Excited to have you here. Where I want to start, I want to flashback. I want to go all the way back to the beginning. Talk to me about growing up. From my understanding, even from the time you were a kid, you were always artistic, a little goofy, loved comedy. Is that true?
Yes, I've been a goofball trying to make people laugh my entire life. Not always succeeding, of course, but I do have some sort of like inner entertainer inside me that makes me, not necessarily join the drama club in high school, but act in a class play and get best actor award. That it's weird. I don't do the formal stuff.
And what was your parents' kind of stance on the creativity side? Was that something they were pushing for, like go to school for this, do this, or was it more so away from that?
It was the opposite of that. I got discouraged from being artistic by my mom. Unfortunately, it turns out I learned later in life that the reason for that was because she herself was discouraged and was interested in becoming an artist and was highly discouraged by her parents. So it just sort of like rolled downhill. But my dad was a naval research psychologist, and my mom a stay-at-home mom who had a background in teaching developmentally disabled folks. And so they weren't really entertainers. They didn't play instruments. My dad did like dad jokes, as they're called now. And that did rub off on me, unfortunately.
And so what did you end up going to school for? If it wasn't something in the arts, like what did you end up deciding?
Well, okay. So to be perfectly honest, I went to, and I assume we're talking about college here.
Correct. Yeah.
I went to San Diego State for 3 years. For all but one semester, I was undeclared because I didn't know what I wanted to do. I started playing around on some Macs in the newsroom. This is like late 80s. The friend of mine worked at the school newspaper, and I started playing around on the Macs. I'm like, oh, I want to do graphic design. So I declared graphic design and was promptly asked to leave the college for bad grades. So again, I didn't take a traditional route to becoming a designer. I ended up being self-taught and having other people help me along the way, and never actually graduated from college.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but you spent a little bit of time as a college radio DJ, right?
That is correct. Yes. Yeah. It was. So the radio station at San Diego State is unique, or was unique. I don't know if it's still the same way, but you either had to have your cable TV hooked up to your stereo to get it, or you had to be in the dorms and use an electrical outlet. You plug in a radio clock. And so basically means practically no one listened. But it was a lot of fun, and I got to be program director for a semester and got to DJ and got to see a bunch of bands and have bands come by the station, and it was a lot of fun. And it, you know, I've always been a huge music fan, and so that for me that was just exciting to be able to do that. And then I got to work in a record store, independent record store later on, my early 20s, which was a similar experience where I got to see like Nirvana play in the store. This is before they went crazy.
Real that's cool. So what year would that have been when you saw Nirvana?
It'd have to be 93, 92. The smells like Teen Spirit was just starting to really take off, and the owner of the store knew the band's manager from previous tours, because we always had in stores, and they had booked this before the thing blew up, and so they came and they played, and it was pretty cool. Blur played in our store too.
And so I know, like, because you knew you wanted to be a graphic designer, so you started designing band posters, I believe album covers as well. Did you do any work with any of those bands?
No big bands. No, there's nobody that I would say on here that you'd recognize.
Fair enough. And when you said kind of you were self-taught, so when you really started to pick up the graphic design skills, that was in your friend's studio, right? Because she had her own design studio and you went there evenings and weekends.
Right. She had a Mac, she had all the software, she had all the fonts, and she was kind enough to say, let me basically camp out overnight. And so I would use the Adobe Classroom in a Book series and teach myself Illustrator and Photoshop, and did all the things that you do when you first learn Photoshop and Illustrator, which is make terrible design choices. But eventually started doing some work in that area, and then started designing, as you said, album covers, CD covers, posters, things like that. And so, it was a combination of not sleeping a lot at night, self-teaching, and my friend would also weigh in and give me some advice as well. So very grateful for that.
And then ultimately you struck it on your own, right? You had your own design studio for a little while.
Yeah. So before I struck out on my own, I had a job at a Pre-Press Express, which was a film output place. Basically, back before everything went digital, you still had to output film, and they would burn plates and to print things. And so I was a production artist there, and I got to learn a lot more about typography and design and functional aspects of it. And then in 1998, I went off on my own to just offer graphic design services.
And so how long did you run your own design business for?
3 years, up until I started working at Netflix. Yeah, and it's interesting because I tried Netflix before they were subscription DVD by mail. They were like a la carte, and someone had told me, like a friend of mine had told me, "Hey, you can get these 10 free rentals from this company called Netflix." I'm like, well, I like free stuff. Okay, cool. So I get it, and I remember I got the thing in the mail, and I remember actively thinking, this could kill Blockbuster. Like, this is like insane. This is so convenient. Why would everybody do this? But then I ran on through my 10, didn't continue on with it, didn't think about it. And then like a half year later, my then sister-in-law was playing indoor volleyball here in Silicon Valley with the graphic designer at Netflix on the product team. There was only one. And she says, "Hey, marketing is looking to hire a graphic designer. Do you know anyone looking?" And so I went through 3 rounds of interviews and started there in April of 2001.
Couple questions based off that. My first one is, why didn't you continue after the 10 free rentals?
Well, I would say that I was not the best businessman at that time in my life. So extraneous spending was not something that I was keen to do or able to do. So yeah, I didn't continue because of that. Plus, a la carte rental is cool and all, but the subscription thing was where it really the rubber hit the road for Netflix, because then it was just completely counterpositioned to DVD rentals anywhere else.
And so this was 2001. This was shortly after the dot-com boom, correct? Or the dot-com bust?
Dot-com bust. Yeah, it was still going on, actually.
And so with that still going on, why were you like, I'm going to go work for a dot-com company?
Because the fact that they had switched to subscription was intriguing to me, because that was like a completely different business model, and it was all built around the convenience of the customer. You basically were able to keep 3 DVDs out at a time, return one. There's no late fees. They had this amazing catalog. They had this amazing recommendation algorithm. It was like, wow, this is really cool. And when I was interviewing, one of the things I liked is they were not in some fancy building. You didn't see any like slide from floor to floor. There was no masseuse. You had to put a quarter in the soda machine to get a soda. You had to at least put some money in. And it struck me as a company that was being run as a business, not as a .com to just sort of like try and cash out, like so many were, and which is why they all imploded. So I was impressed with the way things were run.
And you said you did 3 rounds of interviews?
Yeah.
I'm curious why you think you got the job?
Um, I, it's a good question. I think it comes down to I am a pragmatic creative, meaning that yes, I recognize that you want to be creative, you want to be expressive, but ultimately, graphic design in the service of business has a job to do. And I don't want to pretend to speak for all designers, but I've met a lot of designers who don't think that way. And I think the CMO or the VP of marketing, who then became CMO, Leslie Kilgore, recognized that in me and actually liked that because she's very much an analytical person, very smart, um, very much by the numbers. So I think the idea that she could hire someone who was creative, who was into A/B testing or was open to A/B testing and learning and using leveraging consumer research was something that was probably appealing to her.
And so the answer to this next question is probably the same as that one. But in the intro, I said that you were the first 75, but you were actually within the first 150. And then they went through a round of layoffs, if I'm not mistaken, and went down to 75. So is it for those reasons as to why you were hired, as to why you were kept on being a new employee despite the company going through layoffs?
No, so the layoffs were, first of all, part of the layoffs was the fact that the content team was repositioning, if you will, right? So we had a staff of writers, and they would do the movie synopses, and we had a reviewer on staff, and it was realized that you can't really scale that very efficiently. And so what they wanted to do was start pulling in that data from somewhere else, as opposed to having people on staff rewriting it. And so they basically did layoffs around that. And I think they also were kind of it was now that I look back on it, I think it was a precursor to them introducing the high performance culture that came out in 2002. So it was sort of like I don't want to say trial run, but it was something of a precursor.
Mhm. And I'm curious to get your opinion on post-secondary education. As someone who went to school, ended up getting kicked out, learned everything on their own, and got a job and went very high up in his career so far without having a piece of educational paper saying that he can do it. So where do you land on with college and post-secondary today?
I think it's entirely circumstantial. Like I have to fully recognize I'm a white male. I'm 6'4", and all three of those come with privilege and advantage that people who aren't those don't have. So I can't sit here and say I'm the greatest and I got to where I was solely because I'm super great. It's there's unconscious and conscious biases in society that I guarantee you I have benefited from. And so there's that aspect of it. I think the route that I went, some people hear and they're like, "Oh, that's so cool," and it's like, no, it's really not, because I had to spend twice as long and work twice as hard to learn what I would have learned had I been more disciplined in my youth and stayed in school. That said, school then was cheaper than it is now, so it's tough to say, like, is it something that's mandatory? I don't know. Is it helpful? It seems to be, but it also can saddle you with crippling debt for the rest of your life. So it's got to be, you just got to, everyone's got to weigh it for themselves.
And when you've done hiring, has that been something you've looked for as post-secondary or not as much, more so experience?
Uh, what I looked for was what kind of work had they been doing and where were they working at? So a good example is this woman that I hired from Match.com. She worked at Match.com. Well, they're a subscription. We're a subscription, right? They're consumer facing. We're consumer facing, and so then it was a matter of looking at like the work that she did and what were her thought processes that went into creating the work that she did. It was like this is a perfect parallel for Netflix, even though it seems like what would Match.com and Netflix have in common? There's actually quite a bit of overlap. So that's what I would look for that. I would also look for people that were clearly talented, were in a potentially more junior role than I was hiring for, and that are looking to go to the next level. I used to call them on the cusp, um, because they're usually ready to jump in, roll up their sleeves, and prove themselves, and do great work.
Mhm. And I have a quote here. I can't remember where I got it from, but it says, during my tenure, I helped evolve brand positioning, market messaging, visual assets, language, user experience, user interface across the company and product, including all marketing channels, all of which was based on a sound foundation of branding guided by global consumer market research and A/B testing.
Yep.
That's a mouthful. I kind of want to go through that almost not like we're going to unpack that sentence and kind of see how everything kind of threads into through the brand and everything. But you mentioned Leslie Kilgore. And from my understanding, so Netflix has always been data driven, but she really helped level up on the qualitative side, right?
Yeah. Well, everything was. So we had research, consumer research, in our marketing department. They served the entire company, but the actual research team sat under marketing, and that was purely because Leslie Kilgore. Her background was that she was at Amazon prior to Netflix, and then before that P&G. So she cut her teeth on a company that lives and dies by qualitative and quantitative data, and so she understood the value of having that in house and being able to tap into that. So yeah, I don't know if that answered your question.
That's a good. My question with qualitative data, because obviously, especially with a company like Netflix, I know when you're there 300,000, but when you're filtering through, when you're getting all this qualitative data, and how do you filter through what to apply and what not to?
Well, I mean, the important thing to do with qualitative research is to listen to what people are intending to say, and you do that by having moderators that get people to ladder. It's called laddering. And so a respondent answers a question, they ask another question to get deeper behind the answer. So we ultimately get to the emotional reason why they're giving that answer. And so it's a matter of, if someone says, "Oh, I don't like this." Well, why don't you like this? Because I don't like blue. It's not, your takeaway isn't, "Oh, no blue." It's like, well, why don't you like blue? Blue is kind of mellow. Why is that bad? Because I need things to be more action oriented when it comes to this brand, And so it's like, okay, so they want a sense of liveliness is the takeaway, not no blue, right? So it's just a matter of listening and asking the right questions and having great moderators, who can get the respondents to ladder up.
Do you think brands today are missing qualitative? Because it's so much easier to get quant data versus qualitative data. Do you think it's something that brands are lacking on this right now?
I think so. Yeah, I think. Well, there's a couple of things that they're either not able to do qual, or they don't value it, or the other thing is that companies run into is they seek to use qual and quant, even quant, as validators. In other words, they've got a hypothesis, they want to go out and prove it, and so they write questions that get them the answers that they want, as opposed to seeking to understand, which is really what qualitative. And the other thing is qualitative is directional feedback, right? It's not it's not intended to be, we'll do X because our focus group says Y. It's directional. You get an idea, and then you go out and you do A/B tests if you can, do that.
And And I've heard you say too that people often confuse research and testing. And I want to see, and I'm going to kind of throw my understanding of it, which is probably wrong. So I'm going to get you to correct me after. But from my understanding, so your research is kind of what comes before the testing. So you have a hypothesis, you have to do the research to verify your hypothesis to why you believe that. You can't just be throwing hypothesis out for no reason. And then you test based off of that research and the hypothesis to see if it carries through to your brand.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. So
Perfect.
I'll give you an example. At Netflix, what we do is we take a look at the non-member, what we call the non-member landing page, which is the page you saw before you signed in or before you signed up. And we had one that was, we always had, obviously had one working and it was going, but we'd take these big swings every once in a while and be like, should it all be about testimonials? Should it all be about content? Should it all be about access? And so we have these big themes, and we would create comps based on that. And we would put that in front of people and talk to them about it. And what that allowed us to do is go, okay, this concept has something where we need to make modifications. This one's good to go. This one's DOA. We need to get rid of it, not waste any test cell volume on it. Then we take the ones that made it out of there, and we would A/B test them. So we'd have our control, which would have the bulk of the traffic, because we didn't want to impede, subscriber growth. But then we carve out enough traffic for each of the test cells to find out if any of those other ones did better than control. And once we got to statistical significance and we had a high degree of confidence of it, then we could say control wins, this one wins, whatever.
How do you balance, because I hear you speak on that. That's a very thorough process. How do you balance wanting to be thorough and make sure you've researched and tested everything properly, but also working for a startup and understanding that your advantage is the ability to move quickly? How do you balance the time to be thorough, but also wanting to be fast?
Well, I, yeah, I will say that at Netflix, when I first started there, we had three people. They were supposed to be doing like website analysis, but they ended up being our research department. Um, two quants, one qual, and we would do guerrilla type qual stuff. We had an agreement with Best Buy in 2001 where they were selling our free trial, and they were kind enough to let us use their back rooms for uh, focus groups, if you will, one-on-one focus group. Um, and we would just drive down the freeway, go to Best Buy, buy a bunch of gift cards, say, we'll buy everything that's in your hands right now if you give us feedback on some stuff. And it's just a matter of taking the time to talk to people as opposed to just hypothesizing and hoping that you're right. Um, but I hear what you're saying as far as like a startup, you do have a need to move fast. And, things like brand positioning for a startup, you're going to take your best guess first and you're going to run and gun. And then once you get to product market fit, then you can do kind of step back. And that's what we did at Netflix. We had a brand promise when I first got there that was just sort of like, whatever. And then we did research once we got to a certain level with consumers at large, and it changed quite a bit, and it was very powerful.
And I do want to talk about the brand, but with the Best Buy deal, I'm curious, was that primarily all Best Buys kind of within your area?
No, it was a nationwide deal. But we did with regard to research, we did just use, it was basically the idea that we could pop in and do research really quickly, and see if what we were trying to communicate came across.
And so, kind of with that in mind, because that's obviously a very narrow area of research, how do you know the feedback you're getting from people within a Best Buy in your area is going to apply to someone on the opposite coast in New York, for example? How do you know if it's going to resonate the same way?
Well, I mean, the people, like, we wouldn't approach people who were in the washing machine section. We would approach people in the DVD section. They're buying DVDs, and we get a sense for like how they thought about renting DVDs versus buying DVDs and that sort of thing. And chances are, if you are buying DVDs, you rent DVDs, and if you rent DVDs, you're going to be able to give us a perspective on our messaging, and our visuals to see if we've actually accomplished our goals. So we had a pretty high degree of confidence that the feedback was universal.
And you mentioned how all the research was done in house. How much of an advantage was that to Netflix and to your team as opposed to having to work with someone outside the company?
Oh, it's tremendous. Like, because it gave us efficiency. We were able to learn quicker. And don't get me wrong, we used outside resources. Our research team, if we went and did one-on-ones or triads or whatever in like Salt Lake City, we would work with a research facility there, and our team would coordinate it. But the other thing is that once you start going, you start to build up this muscle memory, and so the internal team understood what the strategy of the company was. They understood what the goals of the company was. They understood what we were trying to get at when we went into do research. And so by having them have that sort of institutional knowledge, that led to a lot more efficiency with regards to being able to get to those insights that we needed to get to.
And then how do you kind of mentioned this earlier, how do you ensure when you're trying to research and verify your hypothesis that you're not making sure all the answers kind of give into what you want? Because as you build that muscle memory, you know where the company's going, you know what you're trying to find. How do you ensure that you're not trying to drive the answers in a certain direction?
Again, it comes down to moderators and having excellent moderators, and also having clarity around what you're trying to learn. And what you're trying to learn is not, are we right about this? It's trying to learn, how do people feel about this? How do people think about this? And if it does align with what we're doing, then great. we're in. That's great. But if not, then we need to know that, so that we can change our messaging or change whatever we need to change to be more effective.
Mhm. And so Netflix, by and large, has always been numbers driven. There's one thing you did that was half positioned towards the algorithm, making the algorithm faster, but also as a marketing play. I want to talk about the Netflix prize.
Yes.
And so, first off, the goal of that was to improve the algorithm by, was it 10%?
Well, ostensibly, yes. The real goal of that was to reposition the perception of Netflix in Silicon Valley. Um, we were having problems recruiting engineers because we weren't seen as a tech company. We were just seen as a movie company. And so that perception needed to change so that we could get some really uh, great engineering talent on our team. And so the idea was, okay, what if we do this? And the 10% improvement to the recommendation algorithm, I don't even know if we've ever applied, to be honest with you, but it got us 3 years of publicity, and it made people think about Netflix. Or made the right people think about Netflix in terms of you know engineering and computer science as opposed to just movies.
And was it just because that was the reason people started looking at Netflix like that was because that was something you were focusing on? Because from an outside perspective, if you just hear that in passing, it sounds like Netflix is looking for help to improve their algorithm, which almost would show the fact that you don't have the talent to improve it by 10%. So why do you think it worked to recruiting talent in? Like, was it just because you were in the news and people knew that's where you were heading?
I think it's because the folks that would be interested in working for a tech company would understand that improving a recommendation algorithm is really hard. And so, to the extent they even if they participated in it, they definitely got it. But even if they didn't participate in it, I would be willing to bet dollars to donuts that they saw it and they're like, "Oh yeah, recommendation algorithm. I never really thought about that. Oh yeah, they've got these shipping things that they have to figure out. I never really thought about that because the public face of Netflix at the time was movies."
And so with being so into numbers, is there ever a point where it's too far? Like where you're too into numbers? Like for example, I read a study, I read this in a book and I have it written down here. I'm going to kind of just try and summarize it, but there was a study done with horse bettors. And when they were given 5 pieces of data on betting on the horses, they were 17% right. When they were given 10 pieces, they were still 17% right. When they were given 15, still 17, 30, they were something like that. Those numbers, the numbers kept incrementally increasing, but the percentage that they were right never changed. So is there a point where you're just getting too much data in to influence your decision making, or is there's no such thing as too much data?
I don't know if it's too much data. Maybe it's more like analysis paralysis, where you're too overwhelmed with the data that you have because you haven't really narrowly defined what you're trying to figure out. I think that can happen a lot where you're just not sure or you're not confident enough to make a call, and that's a problem because you do have to make a call at some point, and there's going to be upsides and downsides to that call, but you just have to make that call at some point. But it is possible to get frozen by data. Absolutely. And to your point, like more data isn't necessarily better data, better for the situation.
And as someone who works in marketing, where do you land, especially right now? I feel like this is an important conversation. Where do you land on with data collection? Because we're seeing this in the news more often with Apple, Google's eliminating third party cookies. What is your kind of stance on consumer data privacy in terms of data collection?
Yeah, that's it's weird because part of me is like, well, the more data we have, the better we're able to target and show relevant ads and relevant messages. Unfortunately, that doesn't just apply to products and services, but it applies to propaganda and false information and that kind of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see where this lands. But I'm of two minds on it because personally I'm not a fan of having disinformation being able to be sent out there. But but at the same time, if you ever run a campaign on Facebook, the targeting that you're able to do on there is insane in a good way because you're in front of people that have shown the interest uh, in what you are putting out there. Hopefully.
Yeah. I feel like that's kind of like I've been asking people these questions over the last few weeks and months as it just keeps coming up in the news. And I feel like that's the answer every single marketer gives. On one hand, like I love it because it allows me to do my job better. But on the other hand, like that's so much data. I don't want people collecting that data on me. So just get to your point. It's gonna be interesting to see kind of how it unfolds over the next months, years, and see how it impacts the industry. Because if Apple continues falling through, Google eliminates third-party cookies, like it's going to dramatically influence how you can target people without all that data. So just curious to see your perspective. But
Well, I think
the,
the other thing it's going to do is it's going to force companies to focus more on like the organic side of things as opposed to the paid, right? So community building, things around that, user generated content, and just trying to spur word of mouth as well. So, like to be fair, like when I first started Netflix, God, we didn't have any social media. Google was around, but there weren't a lot of advertising options there. So it was, but on the other flip side of that is 98% of people rented a movie in the last, week at that time. So we didn't have to worry about getting into personas. We didn't have to worry about micro targeting or anything like that.
But like if targeting gets harder and harder, that's just going to put even a larger emphasis on brand and having people just know you and recognize you. And so you said when you started with Netflix, in terms of brand, they didn't really have a brand position or brand promise or anything, but you said you researched it and you found one. And now that brand promise, correct me if I'm wrong, I have it written down here somewhere, was movie enjoyment made easy.
Yeah, that was the new brand promise that we came to after doing consumer research.
And what in the research showed you that that should be your brand promise?
So it took a while to get to here. So, but this is. I don't want this to sound like it was just like, oh, it was this easy. But essentially, what it came down to is we would talk to people and say, hey, do you like renting movies? Yes, I do. How often do you do it? We get all this contextual background. It's like, well, let's talk about renting movies from Blockbuster. Do you like renting from Blockbuster? And to a person, people would say, yeah, it's fun. It's cool. We go down there and we pick it out. I'm like, okay, cool. Let's walk through the process and just talk to me about what you need to do, what you go through. And so they would start out at home, and it was like, I got to get all the kids corralled, and then I got to get them dressed, and then I got to get them in a car. And believe me, that's not easy. And so we drive to the car. Sometimes there's parking, sometimes we don't have to. And they walk through, and by the end of it, by the time they get to the late fees, they were furious. Like there was this pool of hate for Blockbuster and that entire business model because it was basically rooted in punishing the customer. You weren't going to get you. Chances are you weren't going to get your first choice of movies to begin with. You were on the clock, so you had to watch it as soon as you possibly could. And if you didn't, you got financially punished for it. So we knew that everything about enjoying a movie was painful. And even if you go the route of going to the movie theaters, same thing. Pile everyone in the car, get everyone dressed, go there, and then they have to buy like $100 worth of soda and snacks. And so, and then finding a movie that everyone can agree on, that kind of stuff. So we knew that if we could just be movie enjoyment made easy, if people just sort of had that general feeling about Netflix, that thought about Netflix, not that they could parrot those words back, but that when someone said, hey, have you heard of Netflix? And like, yeah, that sort of essence came to mind, then we'd have something there. And, it's easy to look back now, and I can definitely say that worked. I could also say that when we switched to that, we had a high degree of confidence based on the research, but there's no knowing for sure, right? Again, you have to kind of make a choice.
Was there like another different, say even similar brand positioning you were kind of going back and forth between? Was it like we have 3-4 different options and
There,
this is more?
there, yeah, there was an evolution to it. I mean, at one point we were like, Netflix, we're your movie guide, right? Like there were different iterations to it, and it just didn't feel right. And then after a while, we got to the point of movie enjoyment made easy, and that felt like yes, that ties back to everything that we heard in research.
And was that, so you said like, was that just a feeling? It was like when you're sitting in a boardroom or however it comes up and someone throws that out, is it just like, yes, that's the one, or how do you proceed with that?
I think there was, if I remember correctly, there was a lot of discussion about it. I don't think anyone went, "Oh, you know what it should be? Yes, that's it." It wasn't that. Nothing's that simple. I think there was a lot of discussion about it, if I remember correctly, and it just. I'll be honest with you. I don't know exactly who came up with it, but I think in hindsight, I think it definitely it helped us out tremendously. It's one of the pillars of growth for Netflix for sure.
And what's the relationship between the brand promise and the strategy? Is it like the brand promise helps drive the strategy, or should it like, what's the relationship there?
Well, at Netflix, it didn't per se. So early on, our strategy was to grow big on subscription DVD online, then move into streaming. Then once streaming launched, it was to get to device ubiquity so that we'd be on anything that connected to the internet, right? And then they shifted again, strategy from being content aggregator to content creator because of the changing things. So all of that, yes, there's still an element of movie enjoyment made easy to to paying that off, that strategy, but that didn't really drive the strategy. The strategy was more about reacting to the business environment, and trying to get ahead of trends, before they, you know, before they came to pass.
And then so kind of in the marketing department specifically, then is movie enjoyment made easy? That's your brand promise. Is that kind of your North Star? Is that the filter you have to run all of your actions through before doing them?
Pretty much. Pretty much, yeah. And same goes with the product, and same went with customer service. Like it applied, we customer service. It was typical back then was call to cancel, right? So, and everyone hated it. You called up, a customer service rep would try to talk you out of it, spend a half hour on the phone trying to talk you out of canceling your service. And the thought was, look, if we're movie enjoyment made easy, part of that has to be being able to leave easy. And the hypothesis was that people would come appreciate that and actually remember that in a positive way, even if they were leaving. They would think of that in a positive way. And so we went to 2 clicks to cancel on the website. In our exit surveys, likelihood to recommend and likelihood to return rates shot up. People couldn't believe that the company was being so cool.
Which is shocking because that's probably not as common as it should be. Like it's still common to be able to cancel on the website, but having a phone in is still common as well, which is shocking in 2021.
I completely agree. If you can find a way to get rid of that, get rid of it, because it's not. Well, I mean, it's not to mention it's a cost sink because you have to have people manning the phones to try and talk customers out of leaving. It just puts a bad taste in everyone's mouth. It really does.
Yeah. So that's a good example of how the brand promise affects other elements of the business. And I kind of want to run through different aspects of marketing and see how it kind of relays back into the brand promise. And the first one kind of with messaging and language. So what's the difference between, and maybe they're the same publicly, but what's the difference between a brand promise and a slogan? Like was Netflix slogan at that time, movie enjoyment made easy, or was it something different?
So the brand promise is just a notion. It's the idea. It's what you want people to kind of think of when they think of Netflix. You could change the tagline, or you change the headline to whatever it needed to be. So at one point we figured out that trust was an issue. People hadn't heard of Netflix, so they didn't trust. So one of our lines in one of our TV spots became over a billion DVDs delivered, like the old McDonald's approach to selling hamburgers. But it was like a validation, right? So you had to change it, but it was basically to signal we know what we're doing, and yes, you will get these quickly. So yeah, when it comes to messaging, you have to you always want to have that in the back of the mind, and that is a filter. But what you're saying depends on what type of challenge you're trying to overcome.
And with copywriting specifically, I've heard you say that I have it written down. Here's one other quote. I'm a big fan of quotes, if you can't tell. But it's the skeleton. It's like the foundation, the bones of the house, if you will. Why is copywriting the foundation?
Because you get down all the things that you need to get down. What you want to get across and what you want to communicate gets fleshed out entirely. And then you can start to step back and go like, okay, well, this could be represented visually. This can be represented by words. This can be an infographic. Like you start to then think about how much of the actual copy you need and what can be translated into something that's a visual representation instead.
And what about specifically with, I mean, this might be visual, but what about tone? Like, how does tone factor into it? Because I'm assuming your copy will influence the tone that you're speaking with the customer. So, how do you factor that into your copywriting while also factoring in the brand promise?
So the brand promise is the overarching idea, but the brand attributes are what color your tone and voice. And so we had a set of brand attributes that I used to have memorized, but I don't anymore. But it would be like challenger, but not a maverick. We would talk. We're human. We talk to people, not down to people. We're one on one. We're not salesy. Enthusiastic, not salesy. Was another. So those are the filters you would use when writing copy, so that and you couldn't. Well, it was rare. It'd be almost impossible to get all of the attributes in stuff that you're writing, but you would at least hit one or several, and just sort of keep that sort of feeling throughout all the copy that gets written. using those as your filters.
Okay. And you said there was no like specific persona of the consumer you had, right? It's not like we're targeting Jane, who's a 23-year-old. That wasn't part of the strategy when you were at Netflix.
No, and it's funny because I had not really heard of or worked with personas until leaving Netflix, and I'm still friends with Leslie Kilgore, and had lunch with her once, and I said, "Yeah, why did we never use personas?" And she said that 98% of people households rented a movie in the last week. We didn't need personas. Like there was just like all we had to do was talk about our benefits and lead with benefit and our support points, and we were good.
And so benefits too, I kind of want to touch on that briefly. Benefits isn't showing all the awesome things Netflix can do. It's showing what the results for the consumers as a result of those awesome things you can do, right?
Right, exactly. It's not, and that's something that I see a lot of companies make. A mistake I see a lot of companies make now is that their copy is rooted in we're this for that, we do this. And it's like that's not the benefit for the end consumer. The consumer wants to know what's in it for them, and then you can tell them the support points is where you come in and you say like we do this and that, and you can that's the support, that's the payoff, the benefit that you lead with. So yeah, it's it's important to not get stuck into also feature description. That happens a lot with I see with marketing copy where they start to go into all the features they've got. And it's like, tell me what that does for me. Why should I care about it? Tell me, hook me with that first.
Mhm. Yeah, that's like that reminds me. I interviewed Harry Dry. I don't know if you've heard of the newsletter marketing examples, but one of the things he told me was it's not call to action; it's call to value. Because call to action is inherently selfish, and call to value. So instead of sign up for the newsletter, it's get better at marketing. It was kind of like what he has in his on his website, and I just thought that just really kind of clicked for me. And but now it's fun to look at other brands and see how other brands don't do that, and they're very selfish with their copy.
Yeah,
But
once you start noticing it, you can't stop.
exactly.
But no,
And
no,
so
he's absolutely right.
And so without having a persona, how do you, I'm curious, especially without back then, because it would have been, maybe this is different because you couldn't target us specifically, but how do you speak to different audiences without having one persona?
Well, that's just it. We didn't really have different audiences. If you rented a movie, that meant you were over 18, male or female. Ethnicity didn't really play into it. If you spoke English, then you understood the process. And the fact that the way you rented movies at Blockbuster is the same way you rented them at Hollywood, is the same way you rented them at a mom and pop store. So we didn't have to worry about different consumer experiences that come into play at all. We just basically had to talk about how we're better and why from a benefit standpoint.
Okay. And visually too, because you said kind of the visual, the tone, the visual, that doesn't necessarily map back directly to the brand promise. But why was, I'm curious if you were around for the red decision. Why was Netflix's color red, and why did they want to own that color in the entertainment space?
Yeah, so so it doesn't tie back to the brand promise, but the brand attributes it does. Like for example, really quickly, I chose the font Gotham back in 2004 to be our display font because it matched with our several of our brand attributes. It was very friendly, but it was still bold, very human. So the brand attributes can and should help color what kind of illustrations you use, what kind of typography you use, what type of typefaces you use. When Leslie got to Netflix, the logo was this black and white thing. It looked like a retro TV. They had this sort of multicolored Madras pattern thing as their brand. It didn't really, none of it tied together with the concept. And for Leslie, it was like, look, we're a .com, we're a new model of behavior. We need to figure out how to tie into what people already recognize as kind of visuals that represent movies. And so the reason for red was theater, the curtains, the ropes, the carpets. A lot of theaters are red. They're not as much anymore, but they all were back then. If you look at the Netflix logo type, you'll see it has that sort of like Panaflex, or I forget what the actual one it was modeled after, but it looks like an old Hollywood style lettering. And that again was to try and evoke this idea of we're familiar, even though we're brand new and it's new behavior.
And I mean, on top of that too, that because the mailers were red, so that probably made them stand out a lot more too, right?
Absolutely. And that's another thing that helps word of mouth, because someone walks through your office and they've got this big red thing and they drop it on the outbox. You're probably going to be like, what is that? Oh, you haven't tried Netflix? So yeah, it worked. It definitely worked. And we definitely applied red to everything we did, just about. Yeah.
And so with you kind of mentioned too, there's no social media when you started. So you kind of went from direct mail, Google, social media, like you kind of got to see the whole evolution of the industry during your time at Netflix. I'm curious if things that worked for, or what you noticed worked for direct mail or worked for TV that translated to social media. What are some of those threads that are still consistent today, if any?
Testimonials and user generated content definitely is something that's a thread that's a through line to this day. Direct mail was it's everything changes as you go forward in time. So direct mail at the time when we were doing direct mail, young people did not check their mail, older people did. So it was written from that perspective to that audience, and it was designed with all these old school direct mail techniques that worked with that older audience, right? If you were to do direct mail today and you were part of that, not it's not Valpak, but there's a kind of a startup hipster group mail thing that goes out. If you're to do that, it would be a totally different animal. So some things like I don't know that we necessarily would have. There's nothing that rippled out of direct mail into online or anything like that. But I would definitely say that testimonials are have always been and continue to be, and user generated content continues to be pretty powerful stuff.
With targeting your direct mail, because Netflix was mailing DVDs at the time and having all the data on your consumers and where you're mailing to, did that allow you to kind of paint the picture of the demographics in different areas when you were reaching out to them, or does that still fall under kind of the brand persona?
No, that we work with an external mail house, R. Donnelly, for our test matrices and figured out who the targeting was, what the targeting was to be. Um, so we could get really they had pretty good data on who the households were that we could get to, and what in each particular DMA. So that actually was very helpful. And I think I lost the thread on the question.
That's okay. It's just about were you able to kind of reverse engineer based off of the data you have in your consumers back to who you were mailing to. But if you had that, they clearly had all the data that you needed. But with social media, back to that, what was that like when it started to become more and more prominent in the industry? Like, how was there like, did you have to have full on brainstorming sessions, or what did that look like when that started to become a piece of the puzzle for Netflix's marketing?
So I would say that it was not a big piece of our marketing, even up until the point where I left, when I left. And I think that was a product of kind of like inherent bias. So a lot of us, when Facebook first fired up and it was going gangbusters, we were like, why would anyone want to share all this stuff, all their personal stuff like this? This seems weird. And so I don't think it was necessarily taken too seriously for a long time. Reed, the CEO, co-founder and CEO, he took it seriously. He was on the board of Facebook for a long time, and he tried to get it so that we could integrate signing up. You could sign up for Netflix with Facebook and have it be connected, and so your movies would show up on your Facebook feed. But it turned out that people have a lot of what do they call it? Guilty pleasures when it comes to watching movies that they don't want their friends to see. So that did not go. That ended up getting shuttered. But as far as marketing, and we had a few folks on it, and they were testing stuff out, but just it wasn't as robust as in hindsight I think it should have been. But
And now you look at them today, they have like it seems like they have an Instagram account, a YouTube page for almost every single niche and like different type of, it's impressive. If you just search up Netflix on social media, so many accounts pop up. It's just crazy. So I was curious to see what it was like back then to see how it's evolved.
it's insane compared to what we were doing. What they're doing is like per property, per like genre, per concept. Like they have a social media account for everything. It's insane, and they're all run really well.
Yeah, it's not like they're investing in. It's not that's like half-ass on 10. It's fully like they're mile deep on every single one that they're on, which is impressive. But with everything kind of having to run through that filter of the brand promise, kind of jumping back to that, does that also kind of help guide you in a sense where it keeps you focused? Because I interviewed the co-founder of Starbucks on here. He said one thing he's noticed a lot of startups that he consults with is they get so drawn to things that are outside of what their end goal or what their focus should be. And it's these distractions that kind of limit them from reaching their full potential. So does having that brand promise, did that help you at Netflix and the team kind of stay on task with where we should be moving towards?
I think the brand promise helped us stay on task with regard to how we needed to present ourselves. But I think this having the strategy set and having it be socialized company wide, it was more important for focus. And it's having strategy isn't to say like we would never do X because it's not on strategy per se. Like at one point we tested stores within stores, like physical Netflix rental shops in supermarkets in Vegas because we thought, okay, well, movie enjoyment made easy. You go to the supermarket, you have to go there anyway, so it's not an extra trip, right? So you're killing two birds with one stone. Maybe that would be good, and it just didn't do anything from a performance standpoint. And ultimately, it was decided, you know what, our strategy of grow big online is the strategy. We need to just do that. But we tested it, right? But then there's other things where Reed will just say, no, we're not doing like a la carte rentals because that's not on strategy, and it would be just highly disruptive.
And as it pertains to the brand, a very common sentence now is, "Have you seen that Netflix show?" Or "I watched that Netflix show." Did that sentence become part of the dialect of just society because of the strong brand that Netflix has, or is it because Netflix owned the distribution of that show,
Well, are you talking about people saying it now?
or just in general? I mean, now yes, but even back then, was it different? Has it kind of evolved over time? Then I guess.
Yeah, because I don't think many people would have said, "Hey, did you see that Netflix show?" When they were talking about The Sopranos, they'd be like, "Oh, did you see season 3 of Sopranos?" I haven't gotten that DVD from Netflix yet. It'd be that kind of a conversation because we're content aggregators, which is why we had to have the movie enjoy made easy, that brand attributes. It was critical that we understood who we needed to be because we wouldn't define ourselves by the content we had because we didn't control that. Now it's different. Now they are definitely defined mostly by the content they have, but it was built on the foundation that we had built as content aggregators. So kind of like the Netflix that exists now, I don't know if it would exist at all if the Netflix that existed before it didn't exist.
And when was a tipping point for Netflix when they were no longer considered the underdog? Because they were very much considered the underdog when you started. So, what point did it kind of tip?
Um, uh, I would say it's kind of tough because we were battling Blockbuster. We battled Walmart. They got into the space and they exited. And we were battling Blockbuster right up until the end. And if you read about their demise, they were actually gaining traction with their total access. That was something that was eating at Netflix's business. But the problem was it was bleeding money, so they couldn't afford to continue doing it. Um, and I think like once they had declared bankruptcy, that's kind of when it was just like, oh yeah, we won that battle. For me, that felt like. Okay, now we're rolling out to now. Let's dominate the world. Let's go out there and run the tables.
So, bring me back. Now, this is the day of the press release, so maybe you found it in advance, but to May 27th, 2007, when Best Buy announces Total Access. What's kind of the vibe? What's the reaction within the office?
Oh, you mean Blockbuster?
Sorry, yeah. What did I say? Netflix?
No, you said Best Buy.
Best Buy. Oh my goodness, Blockbuster. Yes, Blockbuster Total Access, not Best
Yeah,
Buy.
yeah. When Blockbuster announced it, it was like, okay, let's see what their offering is. Our in-house finance team and our numbers folks were like a dog on a bone with tracking their financials and where they were with their debt covenants. And when they launched Total Access, someone who Reed knew or was an investor or something noticed that the outside of the envelope had a number on it, and that number was likely correlated to subscriber count. And so they figured that out. And so with that and understanding their financials, our internal team was able to model out over time, like how long they had before they would die. So, when they announced total access, I was like, okay, so from a consumer standpoint, this is a fantastic deal, but it still involves having to go to the store, and we know that people still don't enjoy that. So we're going to keep going on our messaging. We know that what we're saying is resonating. We're growing year over year, but we need to pay close attention to what Blockbuster is doing and how that's going. And it did slow our roll a little bit there for a while.
So in terms of kind of out marketing them, was it more so just double down what we're doing? So what we're doing is working. Was that kind of the
Well, so I'll give you an example. So they came up with a campaign saying that Netflix was the wait by the mailbox company. And with Blockbuster, you can get a new movie tonight. And so we were able to take a look at our brand promise of movie enjoyment made easy. And the fact that we mailed you movies, we mailed you more than one at a time. And so the CMO, the VP of marketing, and Goodby Silverstein came up with this ad campaign to counter that said, there's a movie already waiting for you at home. So it brought the focus back to home, brought the focus back to convenience, and didn't mention Blockbuster at all. Whereas with their campaign, they specifically mentioned us, put our logo in our mailer in their animated TV show or TV commercial, which is just insane.
yeah, it's tons of free promotion for you guys.
Yeah, to do that for a company that's ostensibly the underdog or in second place, why would you give that to them? But they did.
And you didn't reference Blockbuster at all. That's kind of the stance you took. So, and which is it was almost played in reverse, where oh my goodness, Blockbuster was marketing as they were the second place and you were the first place. So how important is it to have that mentality in your marketing of we're already first place?
So there's a couple things to kind of talk about here. One is that you can act like you're a first place brand, even if you're a challenger brand, and go that route. Or you can be a challenger brand and leverage the first place brand's awareness. But at some point, you hopefully flip the scales and you become first place brand and do that. So you see, that's why you see Burger King constantly bringing up McDonald's, because they're in second place. They need to leverage their name. But we always acted like our CMO was very clear that we were to act like a first place brand. We're not going to give away free advertising or make a competitor top of mind just so we can feel good. And get a gotcha in. It's like, nope, we're not about that. We're about us. We're about us and what we provide to the consumer.
And you mentioned how you beat Walmart as well. And so Walmart was actually pre Blockbuster. And I found an article from back when Walmart announced they were going to be doing DVD rentals. And it just shows how kind of unfazed Netflix was at the time. And this is from the article it was an interview with someone, a Netflix spokesperson. They said, we're glad to see them enter the market, adding that Netflix's biggest challenge has been getting the public used to renting DVDs online. They'll convince consumers that this is a cool new way to rent, and that will be Netflix. Netflix, which was built as a base of more than 740,000 subscribers in 4 years of operation, says Walmart will have some catching up to do with the DVD rental business. Where does that confidence come from when, especially at the time, like Netflix is or Walmart is a giant. So when a giant is now they're entering your space, where does the confidence come from to look Goliath in the eyes and be like, we're not afraid?
So first of all, it's Reed was the wellspring of that. But the other thing to keep in mind is Walmart has its hands in many pies. And this was the Walmart.com division that was taking this on, not Walmart in Bentonville, Arkansas. And the .com division had its fingers in many pies itself. And so what you have is a seemingly large corporation, not very narrowly focused, and a Netflix that is completely focused on this. And the quote was absolutely correct. It was a validator. Like if Walmart would get into this, then this must be something that is valuable, and I should look into it. And because it wasn't their focus, and it was never going to be their focus, it just didn't work out.
Even though like it was never going, like it was never their focus and it didn't work out, does still beating Walmart early on give you the confidence even more so when Blockbuster announces their total access that we've already beat Walmart, we can beat Blockbuster too?
Well, there are different circumstances. Like there were rumors that Amazon might be getting into the DVD space, and that was really concerning because, as we've seen, they are nothing if not a constantly improving fulfillment company, right? So that was a concern. Blockbuster, I mean, I don't know about if Walmart necessarily gives the confidence that we could beat Blockbuster, but Blockbuster was saddled with all kinds of debt when it was spun out from, I believe, Viacom. And so they had so many issues working against them that it was just a matter of time. Like if we could continue to grow our market share, that they were going to be in trouble. So I don't know that we necessarily looked at Blockbuster and said, we're going to get you. It was, we're going to execute well. And if we do, you're going to rattle yourself apart. Because Netflix is counter-positioned to the entire industry, not just Blockbuster, right? We had no late fees. You kept 3 DVDs as long as you want. Everything was online. We could recommend stuff from the long tail, from back catalogs that you might not have heard of, that you would actually find a lot of value from because it matched your tastes. If anybody tries to adopt any of that stuff for their physical store, like Blockbuster had to eliminate or tried to eliminate late fees, and even then they didn't fully eliminate them because it was a revenue stream. Punishing their customers was a revenue stream. So, the big thing was we were counter-positioned to the industry.
And I think the ultimate, I mean, obviously with Blockbuster declaring bankruptcy, that's a clear evidence that Netflix has won that battle. But I think what I find, I don't know if irony is the right word, but I was flipping through Netflix yesterday and there's a documentary on Netflix about the last Blockbuster. And I just think that that is amazing.
Yes, I know. I saw that too. I thought it was hilarious. But hey, what are you going to do? I don't. I don't necessarily. I don't necessarily take a lot of pride in the fact that we drove a company or we helped drive a company into bankruptcy or becoming insolvent. I do like the idea that we were able to come up from nothing and become the number one in the space. But honestly, Blockbuster did a lot more to themselves, and the spinning out from Viacom did a lot more damage to them than Netflix did, to be honest. So they were starting from a position of weakness, unfortunately. Even though they were the 800-pound gorilla, multi-billion-dollar corporation, they had a lot of things that were starting to drag them down.
And around the time they launched Total Access, was that around the time that Netflix was really trying to make the push to streaming and not just DVD rental? Was it 2007 around the time where, because I know the Netflix box was around that time. So is that also part of in the back of your mind where they're going to come and compete at us with rentals and we're going to switch our business model to streaming?
Oh, absolutely. That was definitely in the back of our minds because we've been working on streaming for a few years. By the time it launched in 2007, and we knew that at launch the catalog wasn't great, the experience wasn't great, but it was going to get better over time. And we knew that the future of entertainment was going to be streaming. So yes, in the back of our minds, it was like, okay, you can come at us with total access, and we need to be worried about that now because short-term streaming is not viable. But eventually, and they didn't. That's another thing. Blockbuster did not have in-house technical capability to build out streaming. They went with a third party, and that just didn't go very well. We definitely had streaming in the back of our mind since we launched it right around the time Total Access launched.
And so you said how the experience wasn't great in the beginning. I read somewhere, I heard somewhere that you used to send out like a refrigerator sized box for them to download 10,000 movies or something like that. Like what was
that was one of many ideas about like how could we do streaming? What does streaming look like back then? Because no one had done full movies streaming online. It was just YouTube, short, terrible quality clips. And so like, what are the different ideas? And so at one point someone like came up with the idea that, hey, you would have this refrigerator sized device and it would download 10,000 movies and you'd have them anytime. What eventually we settled on they settled on, I shouldn't say we, because I did not do anything to the technical aspects. Progressive downloading, where it would start the download of the movie, and then it would fill in as bandwidth became more available. And so the start of every movie looked like crap, just utter crap. And the catalog was crap. That's why it was, when we launched it, it was free. It was just, hey, you subscribe to our DVD service. Here, you can watch stuff on your PC, not your Mac, your PC.
And so eventually also like the idea for the Netflix box becomes an idea. You go heavy into that, which is essentially just like a device where you can stream from, but instead of it being a refrigerator, it's just the size of a smaller version, smaller than a DVD player even. But you get pretty far along in that process. And I think in your articles you kind of pulled the handbrake and you pulled it hard. Talk to me about working for a company like that where you can invest so much time and effort into something, but to realize it's wrong and not to concern yourself with the sunk cost and time and to kind of pull that handbrake and switch kind of on a dime, switch the strategy on a dime.
Well, I would actually argue that pulling the handbrake on it got us back on strategy, because again, once we launched streaming, the goal was to get on as many internet connected devices as possible. Well, there weren't a lot back then. In fact, our first big push was with PlayStation 3, Xbox 360, and Nintendo Wii, because they all hooked up to the internet and to the TV, right? So then the idea is like, okay, well, let's make a player, and so we can get as many people watching. But then the strategy was device ubiquity. So that means we were going to be producing equipment that was going to compete with companies that we wanted to have them put our app on their devices. And so it was just like, okay, we could get the short-term win of having more people streaming now, or we can kill this thing, or spin it out into to became the Roku player, and then work with OEMs to get their devices connected to the internet, help them figure out how to do that, and then get our app pre-installed on the devices themselves, which would be a lot more valuable. So it was really coming back to it. It was really about what is the strategy and what is the right approach to executing the strategy.
And so that was the streaming, that was around 2007 was when you really kind of started to make that push. And then original content came 2010, 2011. I know originally came 2006.
Yeah, so the first foray into original content for Netflix was Red Envelope Entertainment, and that was a studio set up by Ted Sarandos to basically go out and harvest up content that other traditional media sources didn't know what to do with and passed on. And because of our recommendation algorithms and understanding tastes, we knew that we could actually they could the creator could get a good payday for it, and we could get tremendous value out of it. The only problem with that is that then you're forced to buy whatever is made. You don't actually get to say, you don't have a say in what's made. So that was shuttered after a short while, but it was the first foray into original content for Netflix, and definitely the foundation for what has happened starting in 2012. Yeah, Lilyhammer was the first Netflix original, and that was being worked on while I was still there.
So were you there when kind of the Fincher deal and House of Cards all started going down?
I did. I think that went. I think that was in process when I was there, and then I left, and then it was announced. But yeah,
Okay. Okay. So the real push kind of came after you left. So you weren't necessarily there when they were. So actually, with all you still wrote the question I was going to ask with House of Cards. Then what within the data that you had pointed to that being the right show to start with?
um, well, first of all, Fincher and Spacey were shopping around. They wanted to make it. But second of all, we could take a look at our service and know that Kevin Spacey was popular, David Fincher movies were popular, and the original House of Cards, the BBC show that it was based on, was also popular. And so you could kind of go, this. We think that a majority of our base will actually engage with this. And if we spend the right amount of money and we get the right people to execute this, this would be a statement piece for Netflix originals, and it was.
And so once you're starting to go into originals, and around the time you would have left 23 million subscribers, so even that last 20 million to 23 million, clearly like the scaling is working. Where do you focus your marketing around consumer retention versus consumer acquisition? Because obviously you don't want to be bleeding subscribers as you're adding them every month. So how did you figure out where to focus? Is it to make sure that the marketing is making the people that are on the platform now stay on the platform, or was it still trying to get new people?
Our primary focus was getting new people because we had expanded internationally. We had gone to Latin America, Canada, Latin America, UK, and Ireland before the originals even happened. And I can tell you right now, there's a lot of places that Netflix would not be successful if it didn't have originals. Based on the market research that I participated in, it was just like it was going to be a no-go in South Korea and Spain and Germany. So we were focused on acquisition. The only area in which we played in retention was member communication. And that was just basically through emails or through the inside panel of the DVD mailer during that era, but mainly through emails. But a lot of it relied heavily on the product and the product experience to retain people. So, and then with originals, then the content itself as well.
And with working, you mentioned a little bit earlier the high performance culture. When did so you were there pre high performance culture? What was the culture kind of like before? Was it even really defined? And then was it almost like a culture shock once that got put into place?
So it was not really defined when I got there. It was just sort of like startup, just do whatever. We're just running and doing our thing. And then when they rolled out the high performance culture, I personally remember kind of giving an eye roll and thinking, okay, what is this mumbo jumbo? Like, what is this? And it wasn't, the high performance culture wasn't fully formed when it was launched. It was like, this is what we're intending to do. And we're going to keep working on it. And every quarter, we'd have quarterly business review outside for a day and a half where different areas of the company would present on what they did, what went well, what didn't go well, what's coming up, so that we remain loosely coupled but tightly aligned. And we would also do breakout sessions and talk about different aspects of the culture deck to see if it's still, were we living up to it? Was it still correct? Did it need to adjust or move? So it was an ongoing evolution to build up that culture to where it is today. But I remember being skeptical when it rolled out, to be perfectly honest. But now I believe it is definitely one of the pillars of growth for Netflix, for sure. It helped us punch well above our weight.
Were there any negatives with the high performance culture?
Yeah, well, humans are humans. And so people are going to apply it differently sometimes. So my experience of it in marketing was positive. I thought it was really good. It helped us get rid of politics, and it helped us focus on just what we needed to get out the door. Other folks I've heard in different parts of the company did not experience it that way, and said it was rather harsh. I can't say that they're wrong because I don't know. I'm not them, and I didn't experience that. I personally thought it was good, but the problem with it is that you know over time it gets better and better, but having it applied evenly was a little bit bumpy.
Mhm. But, like, so my biggest takeaway with the high performance culture is almost like you were treated like an adult. You were expected to do your job. There was like, and I think I've read it. I think it was in Reed Hastings' book, potentially, or a book about Reed, and you're quoted in it, and you're talking about how I'm pretty sure. Let me see. I'm pretty sure it's from a book. I'm like 99% sure it was from a book. I wrote in my notes from a book on Reed Hastings, and the quote is: "Enderwick recalls staff within the marketing department being able to sign checks for multi-million-dollar advertising campaigns, and these wouldn't be signed off by the chief marketing officer or by Hastings."
That is correct. I don't remember what what book that would be in, but anyway, yes, um, that is true. It's very much we're hiring you. You're a fully formed adult. We expect you to do the great work that we think you're capable of doing, and not need a lot of hand holding. And the onus was on you to show up, do the work, do the job, do an excellent job. And then if things went wrong, you had to own it. It weren't. It was if something. It wasn't like if you got something went wrong, you got fired. But you had to own it. You had to say yes, that's on me. But that's true. Our head of online advertising would buy placements for our ads and write multi-million-dollar checks, and the CMO would be like, wouldn't need to sign off on it because he was trusted to do that job.
But you also had flex budgeting as well, right?
Yep.
How beneficial was that? Because Granted, like right now, I am a company of one, so I don't have a ton of budgeting. But before that, I got to see a little bit what it looked like. And it's just you're sitting down in March trying to figure out how much money you can spend each place. I'm like, what if things change? Like, how beneficial was it to be able to just kind of mix things up and change things around on the fly?
It's ridiculously helpful to be able to mix things up and reallocate marketing spend to where it could be most efficiently used. Was just, yeah, it was great. Eric Ziegler, who now is CMO at Circle CI, which is a developer service platform, is the one who came up with this, and it's just a brilliant way to, like I said, move marketing dollars where they're being where they're being most efficient. So if someone who's in charge of direct mail channel can't deliver the trials at a CPA versus LTV ratio that's acceptable, they can say, "Hey, I've got 50 grand you can use online." Online's like, "Great, I can spend that efficiently," and so you get more subs with the right metrics around it than you would have if you just stuck with, "This is my budget."
In practice, that sounds amazing, but or in theory, that sounds, but in practice, how does that look? Because especially in a high performance culture, you'd almost feel like you wouldn't want to be like, hey, my element, my side of the marketing isn't delivering properly, take my budget. Like, how does that, because from like an ego perspective, how does that get implemented?
That's just it. The high performance culture took egos out. At least for me, it took ego out of the equation, and it was more about what is the best for the company. Is what we're doing the most efficient thing we can do, or the best thing we can do on behalf of the company? And it wasn't. I don't think anyone ever saw it like, because what would happen is if you say, "I can't spend this $50,000 efficiently this month. Take it, and you can apply it and do it." No one's going to look at that and go, "Oh, direct mail sucks now." But if you have 3 quarters where that's happening, yes, we need to take a look at what you're doing there, and or we need to sit down and figure out what's gone wrong or what isn't working, or is this a channel we need to abandon? So it's not just the flex budgeting um, didn't signal something was wrong and short term, but if there was a pattern, then it was just like anything, you would notice and go, "Hey, wait a second."
Got you. Okay. And so you were there at Netflix for 11 years, right?
Yep.
And I mean, like, I've heard you say that the reason, like, part of the reason it was 11 years, because there's always just more exciting things happening that you get to be a part of.
Yeah.
Going into original content, starting to do that, that sounds exciting too. So why did you decide at that point? Why was that the time for you to leave Netflix?
I, I think it was the shift in marketing was going to happen within the company. Like, first of all, what precipitated me leaving was the CMO leaving, Leslie Kilgore. And the reason she left is because Reed reorganized what the marketing department had under its purview. Research would go over to product, FP&A would go into finance, like all these different things. So that basically the marketing department was just an advertising department. We weren't necessarily focused on growth per se anymore. And the idea of being in a marketing department at a movie studio didn't really appeal to me at that point, because I like the idea of being able to apply brand to performance and measure and grow based on that. And so, it just felt like we were going to become this factory of, okay, apply these templates to this, and there you go. And which I don't think that's how it panned out, but at the time I didn't know. So, yeah.
Okay. And what did you learn? I mean, like, I know you didn't work directly with him, but just working under Reed, like, what are like, because he operationally, he's brilliant. It's like, what did you learn kind of watching him day to day?
I think, well, let's see, one thing for sure is that you don't know everything. And if you don't know everything, you need to be good at recognizing what you don't know and then hire for that. So one of the reasons Netflix was successful was that he hired what I jokingly refer to as the Council of Elders. They're not actual old people, but like he hired Tom Dillon, who had massive, extensive experience in logistics for operations. Hired Leslie Kilgore, who had extensive expertise in consumer marketing. Ted Sarandos, who's still there now, co-CEO, tremendous depth and understanding of not only and love for entertainment and the entertainment industry. So he hired people that were very, very good at their particular area that they were hired for. And the reason he was able to do that is he was able to recognize that his background was a software engineer. So he's not going to know about he's not going to know about marketing. He's not going to know about, especially consumer marketing. He's not going to know about necessarily building out hubs and mini hubs across the country for distribution. So that was one key thing. The other thing that I would say that I took away from working underneath or working with Reed is strategy, the importance of strategy, and why it's important to have that strategy for where you need to go to guide how you're going to get there, and it helps you choose what to do and, just as importantly, what not to do, so you don't lose focus, as you were talking about earlier. So the importance of setting strategy and also testing that strategy to make sure as you go along that it's still valid.
There's one other person I'm just curious about, and correct me if I get his name wrong, but is Nev Savage. What did you learn from him?
As Neve Savage.
Neve Savage.
I learned a ton from him. He was my boss directly, but Netflix, at least in the marketing department, was pretty flat. So if I needed to go work with Leslie on something, I could go work directly with Leslie on, and he didn't like. There was no, oh, you can't talk to the CMO. But Neve, extensive ad and marketing background, had his own agency at one point, was at Razorfish early on, was at AT&T Wireless forever, and then came to Netflix. And he was just a font of knowledge and wisdom with regard to consumer marketing that I honestly, I can't even imagine how much he up-leveled my game with regard to understanding consumer behavior and understanding how to think about messaging and how to think about approaching different scenarios in marketing. I loved working for him, and it wasn't like it was always smooth sailing. I would get in trouble and do things wrong or stuff like that, and he'd be pissed at me, whatever. But eventually, we became friends and hung out after we both left Netflix. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago, but great. I feel very fortunate to have met him and to have learned from him for sure. And Leslie Kilgore, the same thing. Like, good look. I joke that like working at Netflix that long was like going to the best business school I could go to, but getting paid.
Yeah, true. And Neve he was an advisor for Kaizen, right?
Yeah. He was definitely an advisor for a few years for Gary and myself. Yeah.
Yeah, Gary McMath, right?
That's correct.
And I believe it was after about a year. So you left Netflix, and then it was about a year until you started Kaizen, right?
Yeah. I took a year off to kind of like, I don't know, goof off and not work. Which in hindsight, I wish I hadn't done, because I like to work. Not working doesn't suit me. And I just spun my wheels a lot. That was a lot of fun. But I did get to meet a lot of different startups, VCs, and kind of, just play it loose.
Mhm. And then so Kaizen is essentially everything you did for Netflix. You are now available for hire. Essentially, they come to your business and you do similar to what you did for Netflix for these businesses, right?
Well, yeah, we do a lot more now because, I mean, you keep learning as you go, right? But we do start. One of our core things that we do is research-based brand positioning work. But we can also do segmentation and persona development and messaging. And uh, right now, we're doing a research project for a major social media platform. We're helping the European Youth Forum with. What's interesting is the positioning process that we went through at Netflix to get to Movie Enjoyment Made Easy. That process works for everything. It works for B2B, works for B2C, direct to consumer. It works with NGOs. It works with marketplaces. It's just a matter of talking to the right audiences, finding out what the common theme is, getting that tied up into the brand promise, and then who you're talking to filters how you talk about the brand promise, how you translate it. But that same process that we used at Netflix, we use as a core of our offering today.
And what are you doing to learn all the new elements? Like you said, it's Kaizen is one thing, but there's so much more now. How are you adding all of these? How are you adding all these skills to your skill stack?
Part of it is having to do it for Kaizen itself. excuse me, part of it is having clients who ask, hey, we need to figure this out, and us saying, oh, you know what we could do, and then trying it. It works. So it's just a matter of constantly being curious and constantly learning. And there was some time where in 2016, Gary and I both got hired into a company called MZ, which was Machine Zone, which was a mobile games company, because they were raising up two other businesses, a live data platform and an ad buying unit. And so got exposed there to figuring out, like, okay, how do we spin up marketing and think about thought leadership? How do we think about the funnel for this and that, for those various things? So it's just a matter of experiences coming in and helping to teach us new things.
With entrepreneurship being on a pedestal right now, I'm curious what your kind of perspective is, your feelings towards, as someone who's worked in house, you've worked for a company, you've also had your own business. Is there a preference? Is one thing better than the other? Have you noticed different perks from one that you don't get with the other? Like, where do you kind of land on with the two?
Well, so I would say that the difference between in-house and agency is pretty big. When you're hired in-house, you go through the interview process, and once you're hired, the work just shows up. You constantly have work to do, but that's all you have to worry about is doing the work. When you run an agency, every time you meet a potential new client, you're doing the interview process again. So that can be tedious. The other thing is, when you're running an agency, when you're in-house, I should say, you're able to take a look at a problem, and you can kind of see other areas, how other areas are affecting that problem. And you might be able to bring in marshal resources, say, hey, we need to think about this, this, and this, because it's affecting this. When you're in an agency and you see that and you start saying that, it comes across as you're trying to get more business, right? Even if you are coming from the mindset of, I'm working at this company, even though I'm not working at this company, it comes across as, oh, they're just trying to get another contract. So you don't get to go as deep as you want. The other aspect is, in-house, you're working on a brand, you've got you've got all the resources, you've got the consistency of it. When you're working at an agency, you're going from brand to brand to brand. So your variety is in clientele, whereas within a brand, your variety is in execution. But as far as entrepreneurship, that's a whole different kettle of fish. And I think that's a tough. I think it's a tough thing to do, and it's not for the faint of heart. But there are plenty of people out here doing it and succeeding. So,
But you see other people, like, people doing it, but like, you're doing it yourself because you co-founded Kaizen, correct?
yeah, it's weird because Gary and I, we kind of have this philosophy of, we don't want to grow a massive agency. We're not in this to grow Kaizen to be some big behemoth. We like the fact that we work together really well, and we can dial up or dial down resources as we need them. We just want to do interesting work, and more we're starting to want to do community work as well, so that we start to apply our knowledge and our skills to nonprofits and entities that are doing good in the world.
That's awesome. And so it's just the two of you right now, full
Mhm.
time for Kaizen.
Yep.
And does a lot of your clientele come inbound based off your personal brand?
Some of it comes off personal brand. A lot of it comes from referral. But I have had stuff based off the articles that I've written on Medium or on LinkedIn, and even via Twitter. When one client came in via Twitter, which was a surprise.
Well, I mean, because you were LinkedIn Top Voice 2015, has anyone ever come in inbound from Quora because you were a top writer in 2018 on Quora?
No.
No.
I can honestly say no one has ever brought up Quora or my writing on Quora. And that's not. I'm not dinging the site. I'm not trying to be negative. I'm just saying that, like, doesn't hold as much clout from what I understood it did in the early days.
The other kind of social platform I wanted to ask you about, and I mentioned this in my first message to you as well, was In the Chips with Barry. Just talk to me about this page. I mean, 6,500 followers on Instagram. There's a YouTube page with it as well. When did, I think, might even Twitter as well with that? When did the idea for this page start? And like, it's just such a, when you look at kind of your personal brand it's very marketing focused. And then there's this chips page here on the side. Where did this come from?
So I like to cook, and I like to cook interesting foods that might seem odd to people, just to try them. Like, just I don't know. I like food. I like flavor, and I'm a big fan of discovering new flavors to try. And so, to that extent, potato chip brands were coming out with these interesting flavors, and I would buy them, and I'd put it on Facebook and just say, "Yeah, these are pretty good. It tastes a little bit like this," and it was just a text post. And a buddy of mine, Adam Lediker, said, "Hey, you should do a vlog." I'm like, "All right." So I decided to just do a vlog. So I started recording for YouTube, and they were like 1 to 2. They were actually about 2 minutes long, and they were just me rambling, and they were not very. I don't think they were very enjoyable to watch, to be honest with you. But within Instagram, I don't know how. I can't remember exactly how it evolved, but um, I started doing posts on Instagram as just images, and then I thought, well, what if I do? Everybody posts pictures on their feed. What if I just post nothing but videos on my feed? Because that seems kind of counter narrative to Instagram. That'd be kind of interesting. But they have that minute long limit, and so I started shooting them, and I tried to cram everything into a minute, and it just didn't work. It was too stilted. And so then I thought, well, wait a sec. If I just do these quick edits, I can get it under a minute, and it actually is kind of funny. And so, I do things like cut myself off at the end on purpose. And I don't know, I like chips. And now, the number of companies and the number of companies making unique chips have grown. And it's to the point where people now send in chips from all over the world. I get chips from Canada, New Zealand, Australia, just regular people saying, "You got to try these, review these." It's like, all
That's
right.
amazing. And our company sending you chips as well?
Some companies, yeah. Yeah. They'll only, I have to always be upfront with them and be like, I'm going to review them how I'm going to review them. I can't promise you a glowing review. And if they're still okay with it, then cool.
And how long have you been doing it now?
Boy, 3 years, 2 years, 3 years. Yeah, a long time, 3 years. But it's
So
Monday, Wednesday, Friday. And then on Tuesdays, every once in a while, I'll have a guest review where anybody can do a guest review. I'll edit it and add subtitles. And then on Saturdays, canned sandwich, where I sandwich the chips in between two slices of buttered bread.
it's amazing. And so like, what is this, just like a passion project? Like, I'm curious about like there's like the line where it's a hobby or a passion project and then it becomes like an actual job or a revenue source. Like for you, is this just something fun that you do on the side, or like what's kind of your mindset with it?
Well, it started off as just sort of like, whatever. And then it became about, well, what can I do to grow audience that might be different? Like the whole idea of putting video on the Instagram feed instead of photos. And just, kind of pushing here and there to see what I can do. And now I'm in, like, on YouTube, I'm trying to figure out, like, okay, there's this whole SEO thing to this. So I kind of want to play around with that and try to figure that out as well. Um, and then oddly enough, so I'm on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. And YouTube and Twitter or YouTube and Facebook for some reason are growing, and I'm not 100% sure why. Instagram started to slow, but now it's picked back up again. And Twitter is just, I don't even know what Twitter is for in the chips anyway.
And did you say TikTok as well?
Yeah.
How's TikTok?
TikTok ebbs and flows. Like one of my videos got like 24,000 views, and then now it flutters anywhere between 800 and 1,000. So it's weird. And I've got like 4,000 followers, which I don't even know what that means on TikTok per se. Because with Instagram, I did an Instagram live this last weekend and I had people jumping on like, "Oh wow, I haven't seen your stuff on my feed. I didn't know you were still around." And so it's just like, okay, so Instagram clearly, their algorithm clearly does suppresses organic reach, even if you're not a business per se.
I had a buddy post screenshots of analytics from, I think it was 2019 versus 2021. And it was like he was getting like 18,000 views, 20,000 views in 2019. And then his last like three posts had 700 views.
I totally believe it. I think it's basically the Facebookization of Instagram is what's happening. Is they're they're basically doing to Instagram what they did with Facebook. They want to make money, so they want you to pay to have access.
Yeah. Are you posting reels on your Instagram?
Occasionally, yes. And also, I've been testing shorts on YouTube because, amazingly enough, I get a lot more views on shorts on YouTube than I do my regular videos. But then that leads to people being curious about what it is, subscribing, and then watching videos. So it's kind of a flywheel.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Especially YouTube Shorts probably right now because they're probably pushing that and there's not a lot of people using it. So that's probably why you're getting a ton of. That's a good idea.
Exactly.
Maybe I should do that with my podcast because I post all the reels and stuff, but I'm gonna start posting the shorts. That's
You should. You absolutely should.
there. I will. I definitely will. There's a couple other. I'm just gonna throw some rapid fire interests of yours at you, and I just kind of want to get your opinion on the first one. I don't know where I got this from. I don't know if I didn't finish typing. All I wrote was gold. Is that an interest of yours by chance?
Gold?
I don't know. I know the other ones. I know where the rest of them came from, but one just says gold. I don't know where it came from. So I was just going to throw that out there and see if that meant anything, but I'm not sure if it does.
Brown food, but no, I don't know. I
That's all
really
right.
don't. Yeah.
Next one is body surfing.
Oh yeah. Oh, I
Big
missed that.
fan.
Big fan. Yeah, because that's all you need is a swimsuit. And when I lived in San Diego, prior to moving up here for Netflix, I would body surf May through November with just a swimsuit on. It was brilliant, and it's just I don't know. There's something about it. You just really I could just do it for hours on end.
And you mentioned cooking already and craft beer is another interest.
Yep, yep. In fact, I have an Instagram account dedicated to craft beer.
Yeah. I'll make sure
But
everything's
that's
linked too. I'll make sure it's all linked down in the show notes too, so people can find it if they want to. I'll make sure all the accounts are down there. Another one that I noticed was a fan of either graffiti or street art.
street art. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, graffiti. I mean, the line can blur, right? But creative tags, I really dig that. And then street art itself, I really dig that. What really irks me is when tags are just dumb or they're boring. It's like if you're going to go to the trouble of tagging a building, express yourself. Come on. I know you got to do it under duress because you're worried about getting caught, but there's some. I love taking pictures and sharing photos. Anytime I go traveling, I look for street art and good creative tags to share.
What is it you like about them?
Um, I like I like the illegal nature of it. To be honest with you, I like the fact that it's doing something creative in the face of norms and laws. But it's also, you see creativity there that you don't see elsewhere, really. They're not trying to necessarily create fine art. They're just trying to create artistic tags, and to me, or street art to make a statement. And I find that just fascinating.
This next one's not necessarily an interest, but I'm more so curious how it felt to have inspired Guy Fieri's look.
I don't know if I inspired his look, but I did it before him. I did it before him. Um, yeah, no, it's the '90s. I what little hair I had back then, which isn't much more than I have now, was bleached, and I had earrings.
No, I think I was just
And
scrolling on the Instagram and I found one of your posts and you referenced the fact that like you did it first. I thought that was hilarious.
yeah.
But this next one, I mean, I probably should, in hindsight, this next question, I should have asked this probably first. But do you ever get tired of talking about Netflix?
I do worry that from time to time that I talk too much about Netflix because there's more to me than Netflix, and I can do more than what I just did at Netflix. But at the same time, Netflix is such a unique company, and it was such a unique experience, and it was such a big part of my life that I still, every once in a while, get tired of it. But for the most part, I'm still enthusiastic because I would like to see broader adoption of things like the high performance culture. I would like to see more companies have an ability to focus on their strategy and applying it. I would like to see more companies lead with benefit in their marketing messaging because those things all were beneficial and there's no downside to any of them from my perspective. So I still get excited about talking about what Netflix was about, why it was able to be what it became. For now, we'll see.
I ask this question at the end of most podcasts, and is how often do you reflect on everything? I mean, obviously now we just reflect, like we just talked and everything, but how often do you kind of take the time to appreciate everything that you've gone through?
Uh, Pretty much on a daily basis, because let's face it, being able to be at Netflix at a company like Netflix and experience the growth, personal growth, and you know, financial growth. Just I feel like one of the luckiest people in the world, and so I'm very grateful on a regular basis. I'm reflecting back on what Netflix has done for me in my life.
I have one other question before I get to my final question.
Okay.
And it's, you published a blog in March of 2020 called On Frailty, Death, and Exercise. And it's a very, very personal blog post. I'm just curious why why you wanted to share that with it being such a personal matter. And I'll link it down below so people can read it. I know it's probably a difficult thing to talk about out loud, but so people want to read it, I'll make sure it's linked. But why did you decide to publish that?
Um, Catharsis for me. And I published that. There was another thing that I published, and I can't remember what it was. But I've done a couple of those very personal ones, and it's because I kind of want to put it out in the world because I know I can't be the only one who's going through this. And sure enough, the responses to it have indicated that I'm not, and people are looking for stuff to help them feel better. And particularly if they have a pug that they've lost, like they've reached out to me personally to thank me for the article, and that is just enormously satisfying. But I mainly wrote it to sort of because I needed to get it out. I needed to put it on paper, if you will. I put it on Medium, and just write it to get it expressed, so I didn't fester on it too long. And actually, you're the one you're referencing on the fragility and death. That's the one about my dad's passing. The other one I wrote, which I conflated in the answer, was about pugs and one of my pugs dying, um, and how that felt. But again, it's mainly to just sort of like exhale.
I was just curious because because not everyone has that comfort level to share that online. So I was just curious as to why it is so,
Yeah,
because it's important. Like I said, I'll make sure they're linked so people can read them as well.
thank you.
Um, there's no smooth transition to my final question because we're kind of from to this last note here, but it's the last question that I ask everybody. It's, imagine you have a crystal ball and you can ask this crystal ball any question and you will get the 100% honest answer. What is one question you want to know the answer to?
Oh boy, that's a that's a that's big. I've got so many questions. Uh, it's I'm going to go deeply personal. I would like to know what trauma happened to my parents to make them the way they were. That's I know it's not like, oh, what happened, does the world, why are we here or anything like that, but it's sort of like that's something that I didn't get insight to, and I never will. My
Mhm.
dad's passed away. My mom's in a nursing home, incapacitated. So that would be for me something that I'd want to know.
I appreciate kind of your openness and transparency, candidness with the answer to that question, and I also just appreciate your time. Like, this has been a marathon podcast, so I want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to be here. I want to give you the floor. Where can the people find you? Plug anything and everything you got right now.
Okay, well, let's see. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Medium, and Twitter, and of course, I've got the Instagram accounts. Craft Beer Berry, In the Chips with Berry, and my main one, the Berry WE. Um, what else? YouTube, In the Chips, and yeah, that's Kaizen Creative Partnership, kaizencp.com.
Awesome. Well, make sure everything's linked in the show notes down below so people can find it. I want to thank you once again for taking time to be on the podcast. And I want to thank everybody for listening. Whether you've listened the entire way through or you only listen to bits and pieces, I really appreciate you taking time to check this out. Everyone, do me a big favor. Go and follow Barry. There will be a wealth of links down below. You can make sure you follow everything. Check out all his accounts. I highly recommend you do. If you'd like to follow me, find me everywhere on social media at the Jacob Kelly. Feel free to come and say hello. My DMs are always open. As always, today's podcast is powered by TrueFan. Thank you once again for listening, everybody. We'll talk soon.